Mrs. America, it is all about the Equal Rights Amendment, really. Two sides, one who are trying, the feminist movement who are trying to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, are very passionate about it. And then on the other side, we meet Kate Blanchett's Phyllis Schlafly, who is this housewife who's got sort of aspirations and feels the Equal Rights Amendment goes against her values as someone who just wants to be a housewife and a mother. It goes throughout the 1970s, and Phyllis's story. It's a really hard name to say.
It is, and you manage Schlafly, but you're really struggling with Phyllis's.
Well, Phyllis's story. When there's a lot of S's, it's like she sells seashells, and I can't even do that as
Where
she
does
has
she sell them?
with
Does
Phyllis
she sell
Schlafly.
them on the beach?
She's got a lot of bluster to her. She can argue well against people who do get flustered by her. And each episode introduces us to a member on the feminist side. So most prominently, you've got Gloria Steinem, played by Rose Byrne, who's this really well-known female journalist. Shirley Chisholm, whose story I didn't know, but was one that I
No.
was really fascinated by. Uzo Aduba played her. Tracy Ullman in here as Betty Friedan, who again was like this sort of trailblazing female who'd written this book, the Feminine Mystique. And each episode is almost one of these women going up against Phyllis in every episode. It wasn't a series that I loved, but I think it was one that I appreciated through the stories, through the performances of this sort of largely female cast, and John Slattery as Phyllis's husband, who
He's
I thought
really
was
good.
excellent. Did have a heavy-handed message to it, as in things aren't that much better nowadays, and actually the final episode shows that Phyllis's last book before she died. She basically became a novelist after the politicians shunned her for being a right-wing woman. They used her and abused her. Her last book was trumpeting Trump, to put
Oh,
it another
really?
way. But
Really?
and for me, I think and I know you did as well. You struggled and gave up after the first episode, and I almost did as well. But I think I went back on the strength of that first episode. You barely saw any of these other figures other
No.
than Phyllis, and
No.
actually, as it went on, the second episode focused on Gloria Steinem. I think at the end of that episode, where you see her when she was younger getting an abortion, and the doctor saying, not to be embarrassed by anything she done. Obviously, you've watched that episode more recently, so you'd be able to remind me what happened. But from there on in, I was really intrigued by this.
Yeah, I sort of echo you. I
Yeah.
gave up on the first one because I think that the show does a lot of assuming that the people who are watching it will know who these people are, and I had never heard of Phyllis Schlafly. I'd heard of Gloria Steinem because she's just a name that I used to see on CNN and other things, and it did strike me that how America has not changed really. From there's a great deal of new age Phyllis Schlafly's with that viewpoint that what a woman's role is, and there's still this argument that we should be more progressive, and America's not really changed at all in that perspective. So that was interesting for me. And then I reached the
Shirley
circus,
Chisholm.
played by Uzo Aduba. Firstly, I was amazed that I hadn't heard of such an important, pivotal character. And secondly, you just couldn't help but feel for this woman, how she had risen up through the ranks, and how she was let down, and then and you just couldn't. Whatever the era was, it just felt so relatable, so easy to connect with. And I think the only flaw of Mrs. America, and I remember reviewers saying this at the time, is surely this whole show could have been about that character, and I would have been just as engaged and enthralled.
Yeah.
Because the flaw of it is, yes, she's mingling around with the others in the background, and they do try and give other people time, but I just feel like they missed a trick by focusing so much on all these other characters that I was perhaps less interested in, because I was really amazed that I hadn't heard about this prominent black woman who was running for vice president. How could this not be something I would know about? And I just found her performance just wonderful. Her few conversations with her husband where she's talking about this is never going to happen, and it really shone a different light on the show for me. I think the only downside to it is I know that she's not probably because of the format, not prominent in the rest of it. And I
Uh,
think that's a mistake.
and I think for me as well, any of these women could have anchored their own series. I think
Mm.
I suppose my question is, are you going to keep watching it?
I would need your sort of guidance on that. I
Mm.
mean, if I really felt
I think,
disconnected to show,
yeah,
well,
I think,
I've got
yeah.
an irrational dislike of Tracy Ullman. I don't know where that comes from.
I mean,
I've
she does
never
have her own episode. I think it's the next episode, which is her. Basically, each of these women get their own episode. So
Yeah.
what the next episode is Tracy Ullman, and then
Yeah.
it's Aaron Graynor, and then it's Elizabeth Banks, and then it's Margot Martindale. So
Martindale.
each of these women get their own episode. The person who suffers the most in terms of this format, where it's one character per episode, unless you're Phyllis Schlafly, is Elizabeth Banks. I found her character really interesting because she's the only Republican in this group of women who are all
Mm.
Democrats. And even in
Mm.
her own episode, she doesn't get a great deal to do. And I think, I enjoyed it from there. I found the first episode, and to a lesser extent the second episode, a bit of a slog. Each subsequent episode I found quite easy to watch. I
Right.
enjoyed these stories, but I was frustrated that I didn't get to spend more time with each character. In the final episode, as they often do with these based on a true story things, they show you footage of these people and actually how similar most of them look. Like Margot Martindale looks a lot like Bella Asberg, I think is her character, this congresswoman. I think it's an excellent cast. Sarah Paulson as well, as she's sort of
She's really good.
Phyllis's
On the
second.
periphery,
There,
she's really good.
there's an episode where Phyllis sends some of her acolytes, if you will, to the first National Women's Conference that is held. And actually, Sarah Paulson's character has this light bulb moment where it's like, well, why are we protesting this? It makes her sort of shun away from Phyllis's way of thinking. And it's interesting in the way I think another criticism, as you say, is that we should have a working knowledge of American politics because certainly in the 1970s, because the sort of overhaul of you go from Nixon to Ford to Carter to Reagan, and each one has their idea about how they can monopolize these women for their own good, and they do get used to an extent and I think that is the story of most of these episodes, as we found with Shirley and Gloria Steinem sort of pushing for the abortion bill, isn't it? That's her big
I
thing.
can't really put my finger on though why both of us found that first episode quite a barrier to entry, and we were both willing to give up.
I think it was very one-sided, wasn't it? It's like we need to establish Cate Blanchett here is the star. She's this big name. We've managed to get her onto TV, and I think I agree with you more when it's a film star being the lead of it rather than like a filmmaker being behind this. And I think it has got that anchor of this is Phyllis trying to stop this bill from getting ratified. That's the through line, I suppose. Is the ERA going to be ratified? That's the that's the main story. That's the main
your hook.
Every time these women come up against Phyllis, and actually the through line is Phyllis saying, "I listen to my husband. I'm a stay-at-home mum. My priority is my children." And actually, all of those things she says throughout the course of the 10 years are wrong. There are small plot lines about, for example, her oldest son being led astray, and I think that could have had more time devoted to it. Her daughter, who is like Phyllis Jr., but actually changes her name because she's embarrassed by her mum's politics. John Slattery's character, Fred, he becomes more maligned. He gets moved laterally at work and actually becomes like Phyllis's husband. I mean, there are bits that I really liked. It was almost hampered by its structure and it being so interesting at times that there was almost too much to cover in the 9 episodes that it's got. There is enough in there I think that you would enjoy for you to continue.
Okay.
And I think the episodes the episodes coming up are shorter as well, and I think the tone is snappier, and I think you do. Yeah, if you enjoyed the third episode, I think that's more indicative of what the rest of the series is. So yeah.
Mrs. America is all there on the iPlayer now for you to watch.